Because of his hideous appearance, the man was forcibly locked behind an iron mask and thrown into the deepest part of a dungeon where no light ever reached. He believed he would spend his entire life swallowed by despair, until one day a priest named Aramis arrived to pray and suddenly produced a corpse wearing the same iron mask. The man was stunned, and only then did the priest explain that he had come to rescue him. Aramis first lied that the prisoner had died from an illness. Then, while the guards were frozen in confusion, he hid the man inside a body bag and secretly carried him out of the prison. At this moment, the man had no idea that his escape would ignite the most insane and suffocating identity swap in literary history. And this is the film adapted from the final masterpiece of literary giant Alexandre Dumas, The Man in the Iron Mask. It not only faithfully captures the chivalrous spirit of the Musketeers, but also tears open the hypocrisy and darkness beneath royal power through the mysterious figure of the masked prisoner. Leonardo DiCaprio's stunning dual performance further carves the tyrant's arrogance and the prisoner's sorrow deep into memory, creating a legendary work that stands tall in film history. The story begins in France in the year 1662. At that time, the people were trapped in poverty and hunger, and riots erupted frequently in the streets and alleys. When the blue carriage symbolizing royal glory passed through the crowd, curses and attacks followed without end. The empire's glory was fading, and once valiant knights had fallen into a paradise of temptation. The moment D'Artagnan pushed the door open, he saw his old friends laughing and fooling around together. After brief kisses and embraces, his smile faded as he delivered the king's orders. But just as he turned to leave, Porthos suddenly spoke a single line. They had once sworn by these words to remain loyal to their king at all times. Yet the current king, Louis, was nothing short of a complete fool. He was obsessed with pleasure, indulgence, and endless balls. When a minister informed him that riots had broken out in Paris, he turned back in disbelief and asked a single question.
But Paris is the most beautiful city in the world. Why should my people feel anything but pride and contentment?
But to the common people, Paris's splendor was hollow, and even houses adorned with jewels could not compare to the value of one proper meal. Catholic believers rose amid the chaos, declaring that all suffering and hunger stemmed from corrupt royal power. This was also the reason Louis summoned Aramis to meet him. As one of the former three Musketeers, Aramis became a devoted man of faith after retiring and held considerable influence among the people. Louis hoped he would help identify the Catholic leader and have him eliminated. Yet the arrogance in Louis's eyes shocked even Aramis. At that moment, Aramis had to admit that Louis was indeed a true king. He was arrogant and willful, utterly indifferent to the suffering of his people, and would never lower his head to negotiate with those who dared oppose him. When faced with starving refugees, he directly ordered spoiled food to be distributed to them. Only at the ball did he lavish gold without restraint, hanging diamonds on a pig and declaring that whoever caught it could keep the jewels. The nobles immediately lowered themselves, chasing a pig back and forth across the hall. Such an absurd farce truly took place inside the French royal palace. What no one expected was that Louis had drawn everyone together simply to seize another man's fiancée. The young woman trapped beneath the cascading water was named Christine. Not long ago, she had accepted the marriage proposal of a young soldier named Raoul. Lost in happiness, she never noticed that the king had already set his sights on her. The morning sun stood cold and bright as mist filled the air. Just as Christine stepped toward the church for shade, Louis caught up with her. Before she could react, his passionate words poured out in a flood. At that moment, an assassin suddenly appeared. Although D'Artagnan shot him in time, the commotion still drew others. When Raoul saw his fiancée alone with the king, he instantly understood everything and immediately took Christine away. Watching his plan fall apart, Louis lashed out in rage and personally ended the assassin's life. To protect his fiancée from being taken by the king, Raoul abandoned his military career. The news reached D'Artagnan, and he personally went to find Raoul's father, Athos, one of the former three Musketeers. They had once worn black uniforms, following a great king across battlefields, leaving behind countless stories and legends. But now, young soldiers wielded gunpowder and cannons, and swordsmen, like their blades, had become relics of the past, retreating into quiet countryside lives. Yet Athos never forgot the honor of knighthood, and he passed that loyalty on to Raoul. What he never expected was for Louis to be so shameless as to covet his future daughter-in-law.
D'Artagnan, does the king have trouble finding women? Does he have trouble filling his bed? I served his father. Until I retired, I served him. And now to seduce a woman who will mean nothing to him once he has had her, he would put my son's life in danger.
D'Artagnan still held hope for Louis, though he had never experienced fatherhood himself. He had personally witnessed Louis grow up, He had seen how the boy rose step by step from innocence to the throne. He promised Athos that he would do everything he could to stop Louis's actions. Unexpectedly, the moment he returned to the palace, bad news arrived. The people discovered that the king had deceived them with spoiled food, and they rose up and surrounded the palace, facing tens of thousands of refugees. D'Artagnan ordered the soldiers to open the gates and let him go out alone. When his figure appeared before the crowd, the people actually stopped attacking on their own. Perhaps the Empire's glory had faded long ago, but the protection D'Artagnan gave the people would forever remain in their hearts. They were willing to show D'Artagnan respect, but only if they could fill their stomachs. Spoiled food was thrown into the air, and D'Artagnan calmly drew his sword. Then after taking just one bite, he understood the truth.
You're right. It is rotten. I'll speak to the king myself. You have my word on it.
A riot that could have overturned the regime was resolved with surprising ease. But when D'Artagnan returned to the palace, he saw countless ministers blocked at the entrance, while Louis hid in a secret chamber indulging with his lover, showing no interest in state affairs at all. D'Artagnan urged him to prioritize the nation, and a flash of displeasure crossed Louis's face. Yet out of respect for D'Artagnan's contributions to the country, Louis restrained himself and agreed to handle the matter properly. D'Artagnan seemed ready to leave, but instead he raised another issue.
Did you send Raoul to the war so that you could be free to pursue her?
Do you question my honor?
No, I do not question your honor.
He originally intended to persuade Louis to stop chasing women, but never imagined that the king had already fallen deeply for Christine, and had even forcibly sent Raoul to the front lines to obtain her. D'Artagnan's repeated interference had completely angered him.
I am a young king. But I am king.
Then be a good king, Your Majesty.
A king's authority could not be challenged, nor could it be questioned by anyone. Since D'Artagnan wanted him to resolve the refugee crisis, Louis chose to execute the minister who distributed the food, then appoint a new one to put down the rioting refugees. The instant privilege of power was the true reality beneath that cold crown. A king had no need to consider anyone's feelings, nor did he need to restrain his own desires. Sure enough, not long after, Raoul was killed in the very first charge. Athos was devastated. He drew his sword once more and stormed into the palace to avenge his son, but surrounded by royal soldiers, Athos was quickly overwhelmed and fell from his horse. Out of respect for their past bond, D'Artagnan spared his life, but in doing so, he planted the seeds of disaster for an already unstable nation. Late at night, Aramis convened a secret gathering. In addition to the former 3 Musketeers, D'Artagnan also attended the meeting. The topic was simple. Not long ago, Louis had ordered Aramis to find the Catholic leader and have him killed. The problem was, Aramis himself was that leader. He led the believers in resistance not to seize the throne, but to bring new hope to the country. As soon as he finished speaking, the other 2 voiced their agreement. Only D'Artagnan refused to accept it no matter what. He had sworn loyalty to the king, and even if the king was cruel and arrogant, he would not waver, firmly believing that one day Louis would become a beloved ruler. But the other 3 had already lost all hope. They had witnessed the Empire's golden age, and that was why they could not bear to see it sink into ruin. Perhaps future history books will brand their names with the word betrayal, yet they were still willing to pay any price to bring new hope to the Empire. So the next day, the 3 Musketeers vanished. When Louis learned of this, he stormed to D'Artagnan in fury, demanding to know why he had not killed Athos the moment he broke into the palace.
His son is dead. I can think of nothing worse.
D'Artagnan could not betray his oath to Louis, just as he could not sell out his friends to please the king. Within D'Artagnan's tangled emotions lay the impossibility of loyalty to both crown and conscience, his lingering hope for Louis, and his deep concern for the people. Meanwhile, as the moon slowly rose over the sea, the man in the iron mask imprisoned in the fortress suddenly felt a trace of cold light fall upon him. Ignoring all decorum, he climbed upward, utterly mesmerized as he gazed at the moonlight. What he did not know was that a rescue centered on him was quietly unfolding. Aramis disguised himself as a pot-bellied priest and entered the Iron Mask's cell. No one knew the Iron Mask's origin, only that he had been imprisoned there for 6 years, never removing his mask, and that his identity remained a mystery. But when Aramis saw him, his eyes filled with uncontrollable excitement. With no time to explain, He immediately released the substitute from his arms, swapped the two men, and claimed that the Iron Mask had died of plague and needed to be burned at once. He then took the real Iron Mask and sailed away from the prison. It was not until the next day that they finally reached shore. The Iron Mask was finally released, but facing the blazing sunlight, he could not yet adapt and could only shield his eyes tightly with both hands, fearing the warmth and intensity would burn his sight. With the help of the three musketeers, the mask on his face was finally removed. Beneath it was a pale and fragile face. At that moment, the expressions of the three men were equally revealing. Athos was clearly shocked, turning to glance at Aramis, while Aramis, who obviously knew the truth, deliberately avoided his old friend's gaze. As for Porthos, he instinctively shook his head, equally unable to believe what he saw. After 6 long years, the man in the Iron Mask finally saw daylight again. He slowly stood up, walked to a bucket of water, and stared at that familiar yet unfamiliar face. As ripples gently swayed and everything felt like an illusion, he feared that everything before him was nothing more than a dream that would shatter in the next instant. Only after returning to the room and drinking a cup of water did he finally ask the question that had haunted him.
Why was this done to me?
You don't know. What do you remember?
He believed himself innocent, and since he could remember, he had lived in the countryside, attended by several servants, until one day, a man dressed in black took him away and locked him in prison. From that moment on, his face was hidden beneath the Iron Mask as well. He did not understand what had happened, nor did he know his origins, only that his name was Philip.
The old woman called me Philippe.
These men are going to help clean you up. They won't harm you.
Looking at a face identical to the king's, Aramis finally decided to reveal a secret he had hidden for half his life. Back then, the queen had actually given birth to twins, but the old king grew weary of struggles between brothers, and to preserve peace in the realm, he chose to send the younger brother Philip away and falsely announced his death. Even the queen herself was kept in the dark. It was not until the old king lay on his deathbed, unable to bear the weight of guilt, that he revealed the truth, only for it to trigger an even greater tragedy. From childhood onward, all of Louis's authority stemmed from his sacred royal bloodline. He believed himself irreplaceable, only to suddenly discover that he had a brother. To ensure his power would never be threatened, he ordered Aramis to take Philip away, personally placed the Iron Mask upon him, and imprisoned him for life. Aramis once believed that everything he did was for the sake of the country, but only now did he awaken to the truth, and so he decided to help Philip reclaim everything.
We will replace Louis with Philippe.
This would be a bloodless coup, one that would not ignite massive conflict or cost countless lives, yet could bring the nation a humble ruler. Not long after, Louis received news of Philip's death, along with the dust-covered Iron Mask. But when he slowly placed the mask against his own face, a wave of unease inexplicably washed over him. Aramis planned to spend 3 weeks teaching Philip all the manners and rituals of royalty. His plan was nearly flawless, yet he overlooked the most crucial detail. Philip had lived as a farmer for more than 10 years after birth, and then endured 6 years imprisoned in a lightless dungeon. Those 6 years of torment had erased all of his sharpness. Now, with the mask removed and thrust before the public as king, he simply could not adapt. Late at night, another full moon rose, its cold and pure light pouring over him without restraint, unexpectedly stirring his heart. The next day, he asked the group a single question.
Why should I become him? Until you give me a reason, I won't do it.
Every question has an answer, but this one had so many that even the 3 men before him could not agree. Athos suddenly recalled their youthful dream, to serve a good king, not merely a crown. What they sought was the sincerity beneath the mask, not a false and glittering disguise. To pursue this dream, he had given his entire life, and had even lived to hear of his son's death. Now he simply wished to know whether the dream still had a chance to come true. Perhaps this answer touched Philip, as he fell silent and slowly began to change. When a gentle breeze swept across the hillside and footsteps danced lightly along the path, although every gesture of Philip now carried a kingly grace, he would still pause without thinking when a farmer casually offered him an apple. Mountains remain, rivers flow on. Time may change a person's temperament, but it can never alter the heart within. After Raoul's death, Christine entered the palace of her own will to serve Louis, simply to support her family, until one day, she suddenly learned that Raoul's death was no accident, but a carefully planned conspiracy. Before going to the battlefield, he had left behind a final letter for himself, and the delivery address was the royal palace. He knew he would die on that journey, and he also guessed that Christine would submit to Louis. Yet he went without hesitation. When this truth came to light, Christine's emotions erupted. She no longer wished to face Louis, nor could she accept the filth she now believed herself to be. Her sudden rejection sent Louis into a furious rage. To vent his anger, he deliberately moved the royal ball forward, intending to seek amusement. This sudden turn nearly disrupted Aramis's plan. He hurried into the palace to gather information, leading the task of instruction to Athos. But for Athos, this was almost an impossible mission. Philip was far too polite, to the point that even spilling a cup would make him apologize endlessly. Athos had to remind him again and again that a king never admits fault. At Philip's current pace, his identity would be exposed the moment he stepped into the ball. To be safe, Aramis sought out the Queen Mother and revealed the truth of the past. He hoped she would help them and support Philip's ascent to the throne. Upon learning that her other son was still alive, the Queen Mother readily agreed. She had carried guilt over that decision for half her life, and the current Louis was indeed incompetent and unfit to rule. Yet they were both her sons, and after ensuring that Louis would not be executed, she willingly became part of the plan. Soon, the ball arrived as scheduled. Because Louis decreed that everyone must wear masks that night, the four of them were able to blend into the crowd. When Louis stepped onto the floor, they took turns wearing the iron mask, triggering his fear and unease. He had personally forged the iron mask for his brother years ago, and though that brother was now dead, the mask had reappeared. Believing Philip's spirit had come for vengeance, Louis fled to his bedroom halfway through the ball. Everything unfolded exactly as planned. Aramis seized the moment, led his men through a secret passage, successfully restrained Louis, and dressed Philip in the king's clothes. As long as Philip could endure the night, everything would be settled. Yet when Philip appeared at the ball and the crowd instinctively knelt before him, the panic in his eyes was still impossible to hide. Though he struggled to control his emotions, the anomaly was still noticed. When a heavy-set woman accidentally fell at the foot of the steps, Philip instinctively reached out to help her, instantly exposing his true nature. The music came to a sudden stop, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. They could not believe that the once arrogant king would bend down to take a servant's hand. Just as Philip stood frozen in confusion, the Queen Mother suddenly appeared. The moment mother and son locked eyes, everything was understood without a single word. They had both waited far too long for this moment, one longing for a mother's love, the other carrying a lifetime of guilt. With the Queen Mother's official recognition, no one dared cast a doubtful glance again. She told Philip that once the night had passed, there would be plenty of time for them to be together. For now, to avoid suspicion, she had to leave first. She carefully instructed Philip on what to do next, the longing and joy in her eyes impossible to conceal. However, not long after she departed, D'Artagnan appeared. He felt that the king seemed strange tonight, and could not help but keep watching him. Suddenly Christine emerged, angrily denouncing the king before her as a debauched and shameless hypocrite, and publicly revealing the truth behind Raoul's death. If Louis had been standing there, he would have flown into a rage, and Christine might even have been condemned. But the king tonight was Philip, and he possessed a kind and sincere heart. He walked up to Christine and softly spoke a single sentence.
However I have wronged you, I will make amends.
It was this very sentence that shattered the entire plan. D'Artagnan did not know Philip's true identity, but he was convinced the man before him was an impostor. To avoid breaking his oath, he ordered every exit sealed and had Philip taken away from the ball. Meanwhile, the three musketeers had already reached the moat's escape route. The night scenery looked like a painting, and the pure moonlight was about to spill onto the riverbed. Just as they sprinted with all their strength, the drawbridge suddenly dropped, and D'Artagnan appeared with Philip, shattering every plan. Athos had no choice but to gamble everything, seizing Louis in front of everyone and trying to flee with Philip. But at the critical moment, D'Artagnan drew his sword and held Philip hostage instead. The three men could accept 100 Louis deaths, but they could not accept losing Philip. The situation flipped in an instant, and they were forced to hand Louis over. But no one expected Louis to fight dirty, and during the escape, Philip was forcibly left behind again. Watching the three vanish into the distance, a chilling sense of dread suddenly rose in D'Artagnan's heart, and when they returned to the palace, Louis's words filled him with regret that cut straight through him.
You knew there was a man of such resemblance.
He is my brother,
Brother.
my twin, my blood.
Just then, the Queen Mother burst in and demanded that Louis spare Philip. But Louis, having endured a forced confrontation once already, had become cold to everyone, even to his own blood. He would not listen to any persuasion and insisted on ending Philip's life. Only then did D'Artagnan finally understand what a foolish mistake he had made. This country could have welcomed a new monarch, royal blood all the same, someone he could still swear loyalty to, yet it was all ruined by a single wrong choice. He had already betrayed his friends, so he could not stand by and watch Philip, a man of royal blood, die before his eyes. He knelt on one knee, offering his lifelong loyalty in exchange for a path of survival for Philip. At this moment everyone was pleading for Philip, and even if Louis was king, he could not ignore it all and execute him. Swallowing his rage, Louis ordered Philip back to prison, to wear the iron mask again, until the mask became part of him completely. After Philip was taken away, Christine ended her own life outside the window. Everything that belonged to Louis seemed to be slipping away little by little, and the three musketeers who barely escaped the palace fled once again to that secret base. The three were filled with guilt, and just as they were about to argue, they suddenly discovered that D'Artagnan had left them a letter. Philip had been sent back to prison, but tonight at midnight, they would have 10 minutes to rescue him. This might be a trap, but whether to go or not, the choice was theirs. Aramis said nothing, but instead took out the 3 uniforms they once wore from a tomb. As knights of the Empire forever, they would rather fall in blood than die quietly in bed. Those past glories were finally time to reclaim. Disguised as soldiers escorting a prisoner, they infiltrated the prison again, and when the midnight bell rang, D'Artagnan left a bouquet of flowers for the Queen Mother, then rode away from the royal city. The 3 musketeers successfully found Philip and reunited with D'Artagnan, but ever since that day of pleading, Louis no longer trusted him. He sent men to follow D'Artagnan, and sure enough, they cornered the 4 at the prison. Louis immediately arrived with a large force and surrounded the place. There was nowhere left to retreat, and the knights' final war had already begun. Outnumbered, the 4 did not choose surrender or retreat, but wore the same uniforms and held their heads high as they faced the onrushing enemies. Their era may have already passed, but a knight's sword is forever sharp. Yet no matter how skilled they were, strength would still run dry, and when 10 men could not bring them down, Louis sent 100. As more reinforcements arrived, the 4 gradually fell behind, and the soldiers even brought firearms and cannons, making it a fight they could not win. Philip could not bear to see more sacrifices and was about to step forward, but D'Artagnan stopped him. In an instant,
Even if I could give up my king, I could never give up my son.
all 4 were stunned, because the boldest among them turned out to be D'Artagnan. He believed he had never fulfilled a father's duty, so at this moment, he was willing to fight for Philip until the very last breath. The former 3 musketeers became 4 knights. They charged out with a roar. Even with simple weapons in their hands, the spirit of knighthood moved the soldiers on the scene to the core. Even if they had never heard the musketeers' legend, they had been trained by D'Artagnan himself. The knight's spirit is passed down through generations, and what they ultimately serve is the nation, not any single king. Even under Louis's pressure, the men had no choice but to fire, yet they deliberately avoided fatal shots. When the thick smoke finally cleared, the 4 knights still stood proudly between heaven and earth, their faces calm and unshaken. The soldiers immediately lowered their weapons and offered the highest respect to the heroes before them. At this moment, even Louis, no matter how foolish, realized the tide had turned. Unable to accept defeat, he rushed forward, trying to kill Philip. At the most critical instant, D'Artagnan stepped between the brothers and stopped the final disaster. Philip lunged forward in fury, about to strangle Louis, when he heard D'Artagnan shout,
Philip! He is your brother.
Outside, all of you, you're sworn to silence.
As D'Artagnan fell, the truth was finally revealed. Philip also removed the mask, revealing his true face. Before the soldiers could storm in, the identities were switched, and Louis became the man in the iron mask. Philip lifted his head high and proudly announced to the crowd,
They are my royal council and truest friends.
The defeated knight knelt on one knee, hands trembling, holding his breath. They had finally welcomed the king they had longed for, and in the middle of darkness they saw the Empire's new hope. From then on, their glory would shine again, only for a true king. And with that, the story ends. The tale of the man in the iron mask was originally a mysterious chapter of European history, later rewritten by Alexandre Dumas and adapted into this drama, though the details were changed. The story moves cleanly and without hesitation. It carries the flavor of hidden palace secrets, a daring identity swapped by fearless men, a warrior's sense of justice, and threads of love and friendship woven through it all. And Leonardo, behind a single iron mask, acted out two completely different fates. Louis held royal power yet surrendered to indulgence, casting the well-being of the people aside, and in the end he personally locked himself behind the cold iron mask. Philip lived in captivity yet held on to his true heart, and through years without light, he never let go of compassion for ordinary people. Maybe fate never favors power, it only cherishes souls that carry kindness. I'm a film lover, welcome to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.